Welcome to the Revolution Church of New York City podcast. Before we begin, we'd like to remind you that our ministry is supported 100% by listeners like you. Unlike most ministries, Revolution Church of New York City is not backed by grants from larger institutions. To make your 100% tax-deductible donation today, please visit revolutionnyc.com/donate. You can also read more by clicking the donate section on our website to learn more. Thanks for listening.
My name is Vince. I'm the co-pastor here, and this is Revolution NYC. We are a community of grace and provocation, not necessarily in that order. And welcome if you haven't been here before. There's plenty of room. You can come on in, or you can hang out there. It's fine. Grab chairs if you like. So today we have a special guest, friend of our community. Always great to have him. It's been a while, right, since you've been here. So, without further ado, we welcome today philosopher and reluctant theologian Peter Rollins.
Why, thank you. Okie dokie.
I never knew you were a soft talker.
Well, I just start off soft. The fire and brimstone comes later, so you can just stay close and turn me down. Yeah, it's been a while since I've been up here in the throne. You know, I can feel the spirit of Jay hovering, around me. So it's good to be back. And I only knew really this morning for sure that I was going to do this. Vince asked me last night, have you got anything you want to talk about? And there's been some stuff that I've been thinking about. And then this morning I said, this would be a good opportunity just to kind of go through some new material, some stuff that I'm working on in a book at the moment. And so I suppose what I want to do is give a defense of the demonic today. Or not a defense of the demonic so much. There'll be no sacrificing of cats or pulling legs off spiders or anything like that. But a defense of the term demonic and a defense of the idea of demon possession and all of that kind of stuff. So all very fun and fancy. So I've got it written down in here. I didn't have a notepad. I stayed over at Vince's this morning and he was sleeping in, and so I couldn't get any paper from you. So I had to go to the only shop I could find, $14. In God We Trust. This is the name of the shop, In God We Trust. Very nice shop, actually. Very friendly people. 14. And I've used half of it on my notes. Isn't that, yeah. But I couldn't find anywhere else. It was It's like the city that never sleeps, except if it's like 9 a.m. It's like Williamsburg, it's like the apocalypse has happened, like the zombie apocalypse has arrived, no one is around, so there was nothing, I finally got this. So basically, the idea of the demonic, within conservative circles, there's this idea of like some sort of entity who wears a leather jacket and drives like a Harley Davidson and goes around the world and all of that kind of stuff. And so the devil and the demonic is you can call it is real, is actual. And then within kind of liberal tradition, you generally have this idea that, that's all kind of not real. It's all fictional, right? So you've got, and basically, it's maybe how people used to think about mental illness. So what you see as kind of demon possession or whatever is a form of mental illness. And we ascribe this idea of demonic to these phenomenon because it was a pre-scientific age. So you have on one side, the demonic is actual, there's real beings out there and that kind of stuff. And on the other side, this is an outdated term that we should get rid of. I want to use some philosophical ideas to kind of parse out a potential different approach, which can be called the virtual. That the demonic is not actual or false. It's a form of virtuality, and I'm going to explain what I mean by that in a second. But I was inspired by this because I saw an interview where Carl Rogers, kind of a very famous kind of psychotherapist, asked Paul Tillich why he uses the word demonic. He says, you use this term, you're not referring to some guy with a pitchfork or anything like that. So why do you use this term? And Carl Rogers, as kind of the founder of kind of humanistic psychotherapy or client-centered psychotherapy, was saying, is this not a term, a word that we should get rid of? And interesting, Paul Tillich says, no. He says, the word demonic, captures a reality. And there are other ways of capturing this reality, but we'll talk about this, is that the demonic is this experience of, like, in that verse it says, our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. I was, as an aside, I was in a church, when I used to go to church, somebody got up and said, I have a word from the Lord, and their kind of eyes went back, and they kind of did all of this stuff. It was charismatic church. And then they said, for our battle is not against principalities and powers, but against flesh and blood, right? And so everyone was kind of freaking out, because he was supposedly speaking in the name of God, but he'd obviously just fluffed it, right? But you kind of go like, nobody really believed he was speaking in the name of God anyway, so what do? Do you burn him? Because like he's speaking in the name of God, but it's like, must be the devil, or what do you do? So somebody had to get up and go, that's not from God. But it kind of exposed how we don't really believe that he's saying from the God, he just fluffed the line. But yeah, the line is, our battle is not against flesh and blood, but principalities and powers. In other words, there are structures that are larger than us, that are bigger than us, that aren't us, that we materially participate in, without even necessarily being consciously aware of it. And these structures, the interesting thing about these structures is they don't exist. So, fascism doesn't exist. If you took all conscious beings out of the world, there wouldn't be this thing called fascism still sitting there, right? But neither does it properly not exist. And so in philosophical language, that's called a virtuality. It's a virtuality. It doesn't exist, it insists. It's not an existing property, it's an insisting property. It's something that that is bigger than us, that is beyond us, that materially helps us participate in certain ways and do certain rituals and act in certain manners, but we're not really aware of it. It's like grammar. When I'm speaking, I'm assuming all of this grammar in the background, but I'm not aware of the grammar. It's not something that I'm consciously bringing to mind. And in fact, if I do bring it to mind, then my speaking is going to become a lot more difficult. It's something that runs in the background. It's the operating system. And so, in a sense, what Tillich was saying was there are structures that exist that are above and beyond us, and we experience them as forcing themselves down upon us at times. Or we can ignore them, or we can fight them, or we can just accept them. But these structures are there, and yet in a strange way, they're us. There's something that we've created, and yet they're not reducible to us. They exist beyond another. So Hegel uses an example of, you can have a state where everybody is banging the drums and everybody is marching and everyone is involved. Everyone's doing the acts, but nobody actually believes it, right? No one actually, believes in the policies of the state. Everyone's just doing it because they'll, be shot if they don't, or they'll get in trouble if they don't, or that's just the way things are. So nobody subjectively believes in it, and yet objectively the state is still running. You see this in the UK with Parliament. There's all of these crazy rituals around Parliament. Nobody really believes they have any power. No one believes they do anything. But they still structure how we materially use our bodies and how we operate in a certain way. So this idea can be seen as, name as the demonic. A structure that is beyond us and above us, that seems to oppress us, that we don't necessarily affirm, but that we somehow exist within. So what is demon possession? So demon possession, or the demonic, can be said to be when someone subjectively inscribes that into their subjectivity. So in other words, say we live in in Northern Ireland, where I'm from, we live in a sectarian society, Protestants and Catholics who are kind of fighting with each other, and there's certain kind of within working class circles, and there's this violence, this sectarian violence. So in some respects, sectarianism is materially existing, the structure that we live within. And so in some respects, we're all participating in a sectarian world. So if you're part of Northern Ireland, you grew up there, you're born there, to a certain extent you can't help it. It's there in the very structures themselves. It's not like apartheid or anything. It's not as obvious as that, but it's there in the way you know the bars that you go to, the bars that you know you can't go to, the schools or the places you can go to see your friends, and the places that you can't. You know, all of that's going on. And it's interesting because we all take it for granted. It's only when someone comes from a different country and kind of explain, well, why can't I go into that bar? And then you're going like, oh my goodness, why not? You know, it's not, you don't even think about it. You just kind of know it. You're just participating in it. But then there are people who will subjectively inscribe sectarianism into their being. So they'll be sectarian. Or if you take racism, you know, you can live in a racist society, but not subjectively embrace racism. In fact, you could, you know, very much distance yourself from it, but you're still participating in a structure that perpetuates the racism. But then there's the KKK. You know, if you join the KKK, you're a racist. You know, I would say pretty much, you know. Or, you know, if you believe that one race is superior to another, then what you're doing is that what's called in analysis, psychoanalysis, the big other. This other that this virtual other that exists, that's there, you inscribe it into your being, you take it on, and you live it out. So if you take, like, Joffrey in Game of Thrones, if you're in the Game of Thrones, I quite like it. It's shot in Belfast, actually, a lot of it. But Joffrey is structurally like the demonic figure, because Lacan once said, he said, you know, it's crazy for a king to think that he's a beggar, but it's also crazy for a king to think that he's a king, right? Because kingliness doesn't exist. Say, if you take out everything in the world, you won't still have kingliness around. The idea of a king and the hierarchy that justifies a king exists because everyone, even if they don't believe, and if you watch Game of Thrones, you'll notice loads of these people are cynics. They don't really believe in the whole thing, but they materially enact it. Everyone plays their part. And so Joffrey is this figure, this maniacal figure, who in a sense is a king who thinks that he's a king. He's a king who thinks that he is the personification of kingliness, and he's this, ultimately, of course, this incredibly powerful figure in the show. So that's kind of like what, in one sense, I would say in the radical tradition, the demonic describes. The demonic is that big other, that virtuality, that regulates our activity. And demon possession is when that is inscribed into your subjectivity. Okay. You know, take Margaret Thatcher famously said, there is no society. You know, that was one of her famous claims. You know, there is no society, that conservative claim. But the interesting thing is, you know, in a sense, she's right. You know, if all you've got to do is choose between society exists or society doesn't exist, then in a sense, society doesn't exist. If you take everybody out of the world, society isn't there, right? But it's not as simple as not existing either. It may not exist, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. That means it insists. It exists insofar as we materially allow it to exist by participating in it, either objectively or subjectively, either thinking about it or not. And in fact, interestingly, one of the ways that these structures maintain their strength is by us fighting them. And this is kind of difficult because a lot of protests are very, very good. Protests are important, but sometimes protesting something can make it real. Like, for example, in Soviet Russia, opposition was always crushed. Opposition to the state was always crushed. You know, just get rid of it, kill them, right? But eventually, whenever the structure began to disintegrate, well, then people started asking for the opponents to come in, started welcoming opposition, right? Why? Well, because by having some opposition, that then legitimates them. They're serious enough to debate what they're saying, what the structure is something real that should be opposed. You know, you see this even in creationist debates, you know, where, you know, a lot of evolutionary scientists won't debate creationists. And the reason is not because they think they're going to lose, you know. It's because they say, if we debate it, then you're given credibility, even though you can win against it. In other words, you know, the creationists will then put on their CV, you know, I debated on the BBC with such and such or whatever. So even the opposition is itself, in a way, giving a form of legitimacy to it. So in a similar way, you can get to a point where, and what happened is with, you see this in some political movements, when a political system is on the verge of collapse, and they ask for the opposition to come in, and they begin to want to debate, the most radical move at that point is just to go, no, my goodness, it's not worth it. We're just going to continue to live a different way. We're going to show a different mood, a different way of being, and just ignore this. This is nothing. And actually, it's the lack of investment in the very belief in the structure that destroys the structure. In fact, I'm just remembering, I've never read any Terry Pratchett at all, but I read the first paragraph of one book, and I think it was really funny. It was very good, but it was I think there were all these gods, and the problem is the gods only exist insofar as you believe in them. And so there were these gods who were kind of in various forms of kind of like disappearing into nothingness, depending on how many people believed in them, So there was like Thor was pretty much like just like a little tiny thing, it's like, because virtually no one believes in him, And then there was some others that were like really mighty. But the idea being, the structure itself gains its actuality through belief, not through positive belief, through any form of belief, through any form of kind of affirming it. And this is why, the story of the Emperor's New Clothes is so interesting. Because it captures this structure very, very neatly. Everybody knows that the king is naked, so you'll probably all know the story. The king loves his clothes, and so two very smart people come to him and say, "Listen, we'll make you, a beautiful outfit with the most amazing magical thread." And of course, they present the emperor, with nothing. And they say, only the wisest people can see this garment. And everyone's like, oh, it's beautiful, And, but everybody knows, everybody sees nothing, just nakedness. But nobody mentions it. Everybody continues to act as if they believe in it. But nobody kind of really does. And it's a child who calls it out. And in the act of calling it out and saying, this has got no clues. This is nothing. This is ridiculous. This isn't even worth attacking. This is just utterly ridiculous. The king kind of becomes embarrassed, and the whole kind of structure falls apart. So you materially, and that's why, by the way, like with Joffrey and Game of Thrones, it's always embarrassing when you find someone who actually believes their beliefs. It's always a little bit embarrassing when you meet a pastor who actually believes it. It's just inappropriate. It's just there's something impolite about it, or just not, it's like, it just feels a bit funny, you're not supposed to believe, they're full of doubts and unknowing and uncertainty, we all know that, but then you'll meet the odd one who fully believes their beliefs, who's fully engaged, and it's just a little awkward. And, it's like, you meet, like say in snake handling churches or something like that. I was like, oh my goodness, right, because there's something in which they're embodying a structure, subjectively inscribing a structure in which everybody's engaging with, but they're actually, my goodness, taking it really on board. Now, for me, in the radical tradition, the opposite move is the move we should make. It's the move of the child, exposing these structures as false, turning on the light, seeing our brokenness and our unknowing, and this is the move, but I'm not talking about that at the moment. I'm trying to talk about the demonic. I am probably going to go on a couple of little, as I do, if you know me, tangents, but I'm not going to go, I'm just going to mark them as that would be interesting to go in if we wanted to. It's kind of like HTML or hyperlinks or something. It's like, if you think of it as a wiki article, and then some of the things I say will be in blue, and then you can click on that, and then we would go a different direction, okay? And I've spoken elsewhere about some of the other stuff. But yes, so what I want to do then is come to Paul and my interest in Paul, because Paul's got most people aren't a big fan of Paul. So, but yet in philosophy at the moment, there's a real turn to Paul. A lot of theorists who have got nothing to do with the church or religion at all are really fascinated by the Apostle Paul. And one of the reasons why they're interested is because they see something really interesting in, many things, but in his conversion experience. So let's have a look at it very briefly. basically, Paul is persecuting this group of Christians, this group of outsiders. And he's like, really, really aggressive about it, really believes it. He's subjectively inscribed. So, that might be the system within Rome, is like these kind of guys are a bit crazy or whatever. Nobody really believes it, by the way, It's like nobody really believes Caesar's God. At the time, everyone said Caesar's God. No one believed it. That was why it was so strange that people would put themselves to the lions, because nobody believed it. But it's quite interesting whenever you take a belief absolutely seriously, it can actually expose the belief as ridiculous. That's why hyperlink, right? That's why I talk about the most radical move you can do in fundamentalism is not stop believing it, but believe it absolutely. Most of the people who become really radical, interesting people within the Christian traditions are not the ones who don't take it seriously. They're the ones who took it absolutely seriously. And by taking it absolutely seriously, like in doing everything you're supposed to do, sees it unraveling and unfolding from within. Hyperlink. So you've got Paul, anyway. So he's persecuting this group of outsiders, and then he has this revelation, knocked off his horse. Caravaggio has him knocked off his horse, and he's blinded. And what's interesting here is two things. One is, first of all, the role of the outsiders he's persecuting is very important. They're a scapegoat. So a scapegoat is interesting. A scapegoat is an individual or a group of people who take on concretely an antagonism within a certain society or group of people. So, for example, for the fascist, the figure of the Jew is the one who's preventing the community from having an organic, connected role, engagement with their nature and with themselves. The organic whole that the fascist community wants is being opposed by the figure of the Jew. Or at the moment in the UK, you see this with the figure of the Muslim. The Muslim is the problem. The Muslim child, this Muslim community are what's stopping Britain from, getting on its feet and economically being strong, etc., etc. So what the Muslim does in this situation is concretely embody an antagonism that actually exists within society. So instead of saying there's a problem within society at large, the scapegoat takes on the sin, concretizes it, and then we can persecute them. And what's interesting about that structure is then we need the scapegoat. You can't kill the scapegoat completely, because if you get rid of the scapegoat, then you realize that actually that wasn't the solution to the problem. That actually covered over the real problem, right? So you think that by killing off killing off these Muslims or getting them out of our country or doing whatever, then that will solve the problem. And yet, if it were successful, all it would do was show that actually we needed that figure in order to maintain a semblance of unity and a semblance of peace. And to cover over a fragmented reality. So for Paul, who lived in this kind of pagan, kind of Roman world, where everything had its place and everything was structured, and the rich man at his castle, the poor man at his gate, God made them high and low and ordered their estate. That idea that everything has a place, everything's balanced, everything's ordered, right? And then, who's disturbing this? Well, this new community of people called the Christians. They're the complete outsider. They're the ones, if we could get rid of them, then we could re-establish order, right? But of course, what that does is it simply covers over the inherent problems that are existing, right? And so what happens with Paul is the revelation he gets, and Barry Taylor talks about this, it's not really a revelation of anything. It's a of light. It's a revelation of darkness. It's a revelation of what he's doing. So what you have is an amazing line which says, "Why are you persecuting me?" Right? So Paul experiences the idea that in persecuting the complete outsider, I'm killing God. Right? So that's his fundamental insight. He's like, so I'm persecuting this complete outsider. And oh my goodness, this complete outsider is God, right? The very thing that I think is the problem that needs to be solved is actually the very site of salvation itself. And again, hyperlink, right? If I were to go into it, you could see this in the crucifixion itself, where Christ is, the ultimate scapegoat. We get rid of this figure, this Christ, this Jesus, and things will be better. And then the insight is, oh my goodness, the very one who is cursed of God, which is what the cross means, the cursed one of God, the one who is the complete outsider, the one who is nobody, the one who is nothing, the one who is the trash of the world. Oh my goodness, is the very incoming of salvation, right? Which another aside. Well, no, maybe these aren't asides anymore because I'm kind of going into it. But is what in traditional Marxist theory is called the proletariat. The proletariat is not a class. That's what the mistake people make is. It's not that there's the middle class, there's the upper class, and there's lower class. There's the proletariat, the bourgeoisie, or whatever, and there's these various classes. No. Marx's point is there are a whole pile of classes, and then there is the outside, which doesn't even come into the class system, right? So the fundamental antagonism for Marx is not class conflict, class struggle, but rather the conflict between classes and the outside. There's a very famous paradox. I think it originates with Bertrand Russell, and I think it articulates this. And it's kind of a really interesting, strange thing. Basically, he says, imagine that you're going to make a catalogue, right? And the catalogue lists, this is very key, the catalogue lists every library catalogue that doesn't list itself. Right, so it's a library catalogue, national, whatever, US National Library. You're making this catalogue of all catalogues that don't list themselves. So, of course, it makes the list, and then you've got a problem. And the problem is, well, do you list the catalogue itself? Because if you don't list the catalogue, then it's a catalogue that doesn't list itself. So, therefore, it should be in the catalogue, right? But then if you do put it in the catalogue, it's no longer a catalogue that doesn't list itself because it lists itself, so therefore you have to take it out of the catalogue, right? So this paradox basically, it shows, it's a popular way of showing something deeper in mathematics, which is there's always an outside. You can't totalize everything. There's always an outside. And as soon as you bring the outside in, well, that's inside and there'll be a new outside. This is kind of a way of reading the poor you shall always have with you, right? The poor, there's no way of the proletariat you'll always have with you. We always generate an outside. Every time we have an inside, we generate an outside. And then the idea is the outside, far from being the problem. And today the outside is probably shanty towns. The outside is the complete, whatever, I don't know. The outside are the people that we don't even see. What's called the invisible. What some leftists call the invisible. The ones we know they're there, but we just kind of don't see them. And yet they disturb us. Like I was driving here today, and it's true. I pulled, stopped at some traffic lights, and a guy with a sign saying, please help, please give some money. And so I'm sitting at the red light, just going, please turn green, please turn green, please turn green. So he's invisible to me, and yet he's not. He's haunting me. He is a spectre that is disturbing me. He is the complete outsider who disturbs my presence. And I should have given him something that didn't. I felt really bad, but that was the thing. That's the experience of the complete outsider. The complete outsider troubles us. They're invisible, and yet somehow they're a spectre that reminds us that everything's not good. And so in Christianity, I see is that the outsider is not the problem. They're the trash of the world, because trash is what you put outside. So the complete outsider is the trash. You get rid of you, because what do you do with trash? You put it outside the house, right? But it says, no, hold on a second. There's another type of thing that is not within, something that is in the world but not of it, and it's the word holy. Holy also means that which is in the world but not of it, just as trash is in the world but not of it, right? And Paul does this great move where he calls the Christian collective the trash of the world, therefore creating a coincidence of opposites. The trash and the holy come together. The trash is the holy. In other words, the outsider is the one who can help us, bring us salvation if we listen to the outsider. If we open ourselves up to who the outsider is, they will rupture us. They will make us fall off our horse. They will blind us. It will be a nightmare, but we will be reconfigured. The other becomes the scapegoat becomes the means of our further transformation into a more Christ-like, more human mode of being. So you see this in Paul, I think. Your person. Oh, by the way, this is why Jesus was into Samaritans. I don't think he was into Samaritans because they were really good at poker, or they were had really interesting beliefs. It was the structure. It was the position that they had within the society, which was the position of no position, the position of the absolute outsider, the invisible. That's why, and you see this continually, this movement in the Gospels to always the outside. Not because, by the way, am I saying everybody in a shanty town is like really cool and really ethical? Of course not. There's racism, there's sexism, there's all of that's going on there. It's not about it. It's about the very fact that if we open ourselves up to who the outsiders are and why they're outsiders and why we haven't been able to integrate them into the structure, we will find that they are what we need to protect ourselves from experiencing our own brokenness, our own internal conflicts, our own antagonisms. And as we open up to that, there is this mutual transformation that benefits society. Now, one more thing about that is Caiaphas, I think it was Caiaphas, had to then go and help Paul see again, right? Now, Caiaphas was one of the outsiders. Right, he was one of this collective of people who were the complete outside. So he's like really doesn't want to help Paul at all. But he has to also welcome the oppressor. He has to actually. So Paul has this change of being, personal change of being. Right? Well, oh my goodness, I've been an asshole. This is really bad. Whatever. And then Caiaphas has to welcome him in and say, okay, I'm going to accept you. Which is another really offensive thing in a sense. Is in conflict societies like Northern Ireland. Even if there's a change in the oppressor, there has to be, for things to work, an acceptance of the oppressor by the oppressed. They, in a sense, which is a huge move, to say, my goodness, you have been the problem, but I'm going to take your olive branch. I'm going to reach out. I'm going to listen. I'm going to try to accept you in. And in that place, I think there's real transformation, which is incredibly difficult for everybody involved. Now, one of the other things that's connected to this. Oh, by the way, right, that's a personal thing, and this is why I like Paul. Right, that's personal. That's like a personal transformation. Look at what I'm doing. I'm killing these people, the complete outsiders. Actually, I'm killing God. Oh my goodness. I need to change. I need to look at the inherent problems that exist here. I need to change. But it also leads to political transformation. It's utterly. I mean, Paul changes his name. To Paul, isn't it? From Saul to Paul. Anyway. So changes his name and then dedicates himself to building the new collective. And what is the new collective? Well, one of the part that's useful for this talk is the new collective is a place of neither Jew nor Gentile, slave nor free, male nor female. It is a collective in which the oppressions, and those were the tribal identities, and those were the oppressive movements. Depending if you're a man or a woman, a slave or free, a Jew or Gentile, told you your social positioning. And because it was, to say, this pagan society where there was order and balance, all of those structures existed because of either God's will or destiny or history, or that was the structure. And so Paul comes in and says, "No, just live as if it doesn't matter." Now, what's interesting, he says, those who have wives live as if they don't, those who celebrate as if not, those who have things as if they don't. He has this really interesting verse where he goes like, you live in the world, but just don't give it any credence, because if you give it credence, you make it actual. You actualize it. And what I was saying about at the beginning about the actual and the virtual and the not actual, is actually, we have to continue to exist within these structures, but just don't give them any credence, and create a community where that just doesn't exist. Create a community that just, those things don't matter, and where they're ridiculous, where they're silly. So live the eschaton, live the heaven that we aspire to. Let's live it right here, right now, in this, what Hackam Bay would call a temporary autonomous zone. We theatrically enact it for an hour in this space. We theatrically enact this beautiful thing in the hope that actually it transforms how we interact out there. And then the hope is enough communities do this, and maybe we can see actually, instrumental transformation. But in Paul, you have a knot, and the knot is the personal and the political are utterly intertwined. His personal experience of the scapegoating mechanism, his personal experience of trying to externalize his own antagonisms and put it onto someone else, his personal experience of seeing that, connected with being reached out to by the people he was persecuting, is intimately intertwined with his changing his whole life to trying to set up communities where other people can undergo that, and where that new collective can become real. So, it's fascinating stuff. This is why I'm interested in theology. It's really, really interesting. So, see what I want to say in my little $14 book. I guess all I'm trying to say here is, because this is a sermon and not a philosophical lecture, although I'm realizing it probably is more of a philosophical lecture than a sermon. I'm going to make it into a sermon, because sermons are supposed to be challenging. And so, one of the challenges I have when I'm thinking this kind of stuff through are, first of all, what demonic structures am I participating in? I'm not, saying that but what demonic structures am I part of? Two, who do I scapegoat in order to try to avoid that confrontation with that demonic force? Who do I blame? What individual or community do I blame, rather than, in a sense, seeing my own complicity within? Now, that doesn't also mean, because when we talked about the demonic, the idea that some individuals do incarnate this stuff, that doesn't mean not fighting it and not being angry when we see this injustice. But in a sense, strange way of going, like, you know what? This exists because of thousands or tens of thousands or millions of people's material interactions in something. And how do I play into that, right? Who do I scapegoat in order to try to blame for that? And finally, am I trying to be part of a community of people in which we drain these structures of their power, where we engage in exorcisms, where we have a community where we exorcise these parts of ourselves, attempting not simply to, get out of the subjective inscription, because most of us are not subjectively inscribed with sectarianism or racism or whatever, but rather, how do we create a community which doesn't materially enact these in some sort of way, in some sort of demonic way? And what you see in Paul is a conversion. But, Paul is a paradigmatic conversion. It's called rebirth. And as I'm fond of saying, and most of you will know, birth is not something one experiences. It's what transforms how you experience everything. It's you don't have 10 things in the world. If religious experience is not some experience of something. Now, I've done that kind of stuff, and you can do it better on drugs, as Vince could well tell you. From the past, not in the present. In fact, he's never, ever touched anything. Nothing. It doesn't even take paracetamol. And some of the guys, like, just pure as driven snow. But if you want an experience, there is stuff out there, and Vince will get you a good price on it. No, I'm joking. But religious experience proper is not so much an experience of something. It's that which, I say, transforms how you experience everything. So you no longer look at anything in the same way. It's not like 10 things existed in the world and now 11 things do because the religious experience happened. It's that you experience those 10 things differently. And people are no longer looked at in utilitarian ways. You don't engage in the world with a pure superficiality. You experience a depth dimension to being itself. You're not pursuing a sacred object, but realize that the sacred is not an object, but rather a depth dimension in all objects. You experience a density of life, a short-circuiting of one's being. That's another hyperlink to the idea of short-circuiting, which is kind of what I'm trying to say, actually, which is, where you're kind of like shocked out of the material structures that you engage in briefly, and then you reintegrate into them. That's why we need collectives like this to try to remain faithful to that unplugging. And so conversion for me is that experience of Paul. It's that experience of not adding something to our experience, but rather it's apocalypse. Apocalypse in its proper sense. Apocalypse means the tearing of a curtain. So apocalypse is the ripping back of something, and you see. An apocalyptic moment is, one of the ways you can understand apocalypse in the context of this is you rip aside the fantasy that life could be perfect if only you could get rid of that group of Christians or the Muslims or the Jews or whatever it is. Then life would be great. It's a ripping back of that and showing the truth. The truth being, you know what, you need that. You need the scapegoat, because the scapegoat prevents you looking at yourself. It's that and so it's not an addition. Religious experience is not an addition; it's a subtraction. Something's like taken away, revealed, that utterly transforms you, and should be evidenced in the attempts to live that out differently in small ways and big ways, but primarily in the formations of new collectives that are in the world but not of it. And this, this is very important, because I've been trying to think about it, going like, if in a sense there's always an outside, if you take that idea of going, when there's an inside, there's always an outside, the poor you will always have with you, then what's the answer? Because obviously the liberal answer is, well, no, everyone can be in. So that's liberal. Everyone can be in. Everyone can have their identity be in the inside. And then you have this idea, which, no, you'll always have an outside. And that's kind of really depressing. But I think Paul's solution is fascinating, which is you realize that the outside within us all is that we are all, in different ways, in big ways and small ways, more than and less than and different than our various identities and our various markers. And to try to create a community in which that's why I like AA, and I talk about AA a lot, because AA is one of the few communities that I can see that doesn't scapegoat. Most communities are built on scapegoating. In other words, we can have fun because we hate that, if only those crazies weren't out there, then everything would be great. So we can unify on mutual dislike of someone, right? So that's a great way of setting up community. It actually is. It's very effective. But the alternative is you can create a community where you don't scapegoat the other, because you say, I've got the problem. And that's what you do in AA. The first thing you do is like, I'm Pete and I'm an alcoholic. I've got the problem. It's not going to blame someone out there. I have to look at myself. So you create a community in which you don't scapegoat, because in a sense you see the brokenness within yourselves and don't externalize the brokenness onto somebody else. And so what you do by calling the new collective, scum of the earth is the other definition. So Paul's asked, what is the Christian? Well, the Christian is the scum of the earth, the trash of the world. Now, there's the one who experiences the loss of their identity. Now, what that means, I think, if we can begin to do that, is we're going to be less threatened by the real outsiders who are really out on the outside. We're going to be more welcoming, I think, of the outsiders, and we're going to probably be more likely to give ourselves to action which tries to help the outsiders. So what you have is, the poor will always be with us, but let's share the poverty. We're all poor. Let's not put it on those people, the complete outsiders. Let's realize that the reason why they exist is because we don't acknowledge our poverty, because we want to put it onto somebody else, and we want to say we've got it all, because we're terrified of looking at our own poverty, and so we're going to use someone else to carry that blame. But if we can create communities, the trash of the world, we may, in the Pauline thing of in that personal transformation, simultaneously have a political transformation where we're going to be more likely to be open to those who we remain otherwise closed to. And we're finished. What happens next? There's a round of applause. Thank you very much. There's tears. Come to the front. Can I see a hand? Does anybody want to be part of the community of scum? The outsiders, the trash of the world. It's a lot of fun. That's the good news. Life is crap, and that's good. There you go. We're not going to get our private jet with this message. Yeah, probably not. Very good.
Thank you, Pete.
No worries, anytime.
Thanks again to Pete. Another round of applause for him, please. And, so this is normally the time that I as the pastor, comes up and tell you what he really meant. By that talk, but I won't do that. We will pass around the offering plate, though, if you consider this community, or even if you don't, and appreciate this space. We do have bills to pay to keep this space here every Sunday, which we have for the last 6 years, I think. So we'll start it that way. Are there any announcements in the community right now? Anything anybody would like anyone to know? All right. Well, this is our time as this goes around. We do have a coffee hour at this church. We use beer instead of coffee, or whatever drink you like. So I encourage people to stick around, talk with Pete, talk with one another, and ask questions. This is our discussion time now. And I encourage you to introduce yourself to someone you don't know, and perhaps buy them a drink and say, let's chat a little bit. So let's end with a prayer for those those that do. Those that don't, you can just awkwardly stare at one another. God of the outside, we pray that we acknowledge our outside, whatever that is within us, and that in that acknowledgement we can see those on the outside. This is our simple prayer. Hear our prayer. Amen.